Hey guys, and welcome to part 3 of how to paint Sepsimus the Plaguesworn. So today I thought we'd continue with the armor painting and finish it off. It is quite a complex armor, and doing just one episode on it I didn't think would be enough, as it has a lot of complex shapes here. So we can see how far I've gotten so far. You can see the way all the blends are going. But I think one more episode on it is probably a good idea, and I thought I'd leave this arm here because it has a lot of variations in it, so we can see how to do the wet blending and do the final layers over the top and the highlights. So if you haven't seen the previous one, go back and watch the previous episode, and that'll give you an idea of how to begin the pale armor. We focused on this belly armor here, so yeah, definitely go back and watch that. If I'm really good, I'll put a little link to it here, and you can go and watch it first before you do this. I'm not going to go into huge details on the colors here and so on. I went over that in the previous one, so we're going to get right into it, and we'll begin working up these plates and treating them. And so the concept here, like before, we're really looking at mostly lighting from above, so the pale tone above, but there are some cases where you're going to do it from the bottom up, and we can see here on these little plates on the leg that instead of going from the top down with the light on the top, it's gone from the edge and gone back up in, and that's kind of just an aesthetic thing to choose where you want the shadow to be, and in these cases it makes more sense to do it there than from the top. We're not trying to look for a lighting situation that's like a realism type of thing. Think of it more like movie lighting. Movie lighting, there's lights everywhere on the character, on the person in front of the camera. You'll see rim lights and bounce lights and warm and cool lights and all kinds of things, and it's complete. And they could be just standing in a moonlight situation or just a daylight, but there'll be like a ton of other lights going on, and that's because they've got to try to frame that composition, that frame with the actor, to really read on camera, right? So that the viewer, you're watching it, everything is visually appealing and silhouetted correctly and all that kind of stuff, so that it reads well. And that's the same thing on this type of armor process. We're really trying to attack each of the armor panels and make sure that as a whole everything here reads well. So if that means the light has to go in a different direction, we do it. You don't have to stay totally doggedly faithful to that sort of light always coming from this direction or whatever, because in these type of things, especially something as fanciful and stylized as this, it's certainly not a real character, and it's certainly not standing in a real environment, so it doesn't have to be done that way. So that's just something to bear in mind when you're doing these. You don't need to necessarily stick to that idea of where the light's coming from all the time. You've got artistic license to push it into whatever direction you want and make it as cool as possible, because that's really what this is about. We're just trying to make something that looks cool, and it invokes the idea of something rather than necessarily translating a one-for-one idea of something. So that's all my waffling on to start off with. I think we'll get right into it. I've got the palette ready, so let's set up and start painting. Alright, and so to begin with, we're going to build up the base color, which is with this turquoise, a little bit of the grey. We're building up our tone we're going to use, and we just get that in, a tiny bit of grey in there, more of that turquoise, until we see that color that we've been using, which is basically a slightly desaturated, slightly desaturated grey. A bit of water in there. Okay, not too much. Again, with this wet blending, you got to be a little bit thicker with the paint. You can't be quite as thin, otherwise it dries too fast, and then you can't do the technique. So we're using this, and all we're going to do, let's start with the panel here on the arm. So I think for this, the shadow is going to be towards the top where we come into that other panel line there. I think that'll be make the most sense. So we just paint that on really quickly, and you got to do this sort of relatively fast. You can't muck around. So we wipe off the brush, quickly wipe it. Okay, grab your corpse pail here, and then whack that in just along the bottom here. All right. that. Then wipe off the brush. Okay, and then we just gently just run it back and forwards, just creating nice, interesting little shapes. It doesn't have to be super amazing, just feathering in some little ideas, little bits and pieces here and there, just to break it up and give us something to work with. And we can come back in and redo this. But I like to throw in a few little hatch marks and a few little, variant mark making. We're trying to simulate that this might be flesh, or this might be something a little bit more interesting than just, a dull surface or a hard surface. We're just trying to get it to read as something else. So it's not the thing that it's been, sculpted as, right? So that's the kind of idea. So once that's sort of sitting there, it can still be wet while you do this. And so then we're going to add successive layers of the color to build it out. So we grab a little bit more of this corpse pale again, and we start from the bottom and work our way up. And so we turn the model so it's in a more comfortable position, and we just start doing these nice little mark making lines. Start streaking, and finding some interesting colors and shapes, forms. I'm just going through and continuing that process. And if your brush starts to dry up like that, go again. Now I think we'll just throw a little bit of a mid-tone in, so we'll chuck a little bit of this turquoise into the mix, and just start layering a few of these lighter tones in. Now that we've got a bit of a blend going that looks kind of cool, then we'll just keep working it. Okay, and just building up those tones. Okay, we might come in with a bit of the dark there just at the top, just to richen the color. So grab a little bit more of that, and then just run that in, just to even it out a bit so it's not as, I guess, patchy would be the word to use. You just want to make sure that the blending is working well, and then again come back in. And so it's a process of going backwards and forwards with the colors, just finding the correct, I guess, blending that feels good. Little tiny lines, little feathered lines like this, just building it up and creating something interesting. And you're just working that surface, creating a nice little group of colors and little marks there. Okay, and so then once we've gotten it to the point that we like, you'll then come in with the with this lighter tone here, and we'll use that as a line edge highlight along the edge. So I'm going to go through and just clean that up a little bit more, and then we'll do the line edge highlight, and we'll move on to the next piece. Alright, and so let's take a look. So there we go. And you're just building it up like that, going back and forth, just trying to establish, a good set of colors and fades on little tiny marks, just to break up the surface and give it something interesting. So now we'll do this little piece across the top. So for that, obviously, it's a little bit hard to wet blend it. So we'll get our dark here and just run it across the top. Okay, and once we've got that, then we just come straight in and do a little line highlight of our corpse pale here. Okay, we're just running that across the top. Just using the edge of your brush. Okay, and then we'll just do some little flick lines, little tiny marks, just some little dots and stuff, just to simulate that, again, it's not totally a smooth surface and that there is something else going on. Okay. And there we go. So now we have just that little edge highlight, and then finally we'll go through, and a little tiny area like this doesn't need much, it just needs a little bit, and then we'll just run a little bit of a highlight across that again just to bump it. Okay, and possibly even a little tiny bit of a mid-tone again. We'll just use a little bit of that. We might just lay in just a little bit here and there. Just plopping that in where the panel is the thickest, just to give it a little bit more of a gradient between the dark and the light. There we go. Yeah, maybe a little more of this. We'll run that in just to clean up that line. There we go. Yeah, that's all better. Okay, and there we go. So you've got your first panel done there, and it's looking cool. So now we'll move on, and we'll go through and do this back piece here, and I'll take you through a little bit of that. So you can just see, we'll attack just this side here, and that's another thing too, when you've got a change of plane like this, rather than do the whole thing at once, because it's going to be difficult, just focus on that one panel, and then you move across to the next panel and so on, and slowly build that up around, and that will make it much more easier to understand. You're trying to break this down into as smaller areas as possible. Obviously the paint's going to dry quickly, and you're not going to have time to do that blending, so you want to keep each area as small as possible, so that it makes it much simpler to build up the colors. And the beautiful thing about this technique is once you've done all this, you don't have to go back, you know, you're finished. So it's a nice, although it feels sort of a bit pedantic at first and a bit sort of fiddly, you are actually completing the thing as you go. So which you normally wouldn't do in other circumstances, but for this particular technique, you actually end up with a finished product for each of those pieces, apart from obviously the glazing and the little bits of touch-ups we're going to do later. But the overall finish is basically done, which is great. So it is ultimately, I guess, relatively efficient. So I'll come back in a second and we'll do the next one. Alright, so now we'll try that back piece there. So I've done some of the other little bits in here, just these small areas. You can see how I've tackled it. So for where you've got two seams above and below, I've just done the light sort of from above, which makes most sense. In areas like under here, I've done a bit of light on both sides and the shadow more in the middle. It just depends on where it is on the model and what looks the best. You can see there down on the shin here, I put the shadow more in the center, and that's because it's like a bit of a concave surface, so we put the shadow in the middle and light on both sides. And you can see there on the back, same thing again. And so we're just picking those spots and creating something interesting, so it all kind of fits together. So yeah, let's try that part there. So we've got some of our mix here. Just get a bit of that gray mixed in. Okay, and then we're just going to have the shadow just down the bottom here. So as I said, we're just picking off this one side, and we're not focusing on the whole thing. Okay. Alright, just like that. Wipe off your brush, and then just gently feather that in for the first pass. We're just creating those nice little marks there. And just giving something interesting for this. Let that sit. And then it'll always be a little grainy at first, or a little bit thin maybe, depending on how thick you put this on. I still tend to apply thinner layers. It's a natural thing, you know, you get used to doing that, so sometimes it'll go on a little bit grainy, but you know, we're going to be doing a couple of coats, so it's not going to matter too much. So we just want to bring that line in there. And then just do some little feathering marks. Just like that. Little tiny marks. Just creating a little bit of light, so we might have, you know, a little bit of light running down the edge there where the elbow is going towards the sky. And run that line down there. So we've got a kind of light happening there. Okay, and then we just come back in and go again. We might throw a little bit of mid-tone in there. So I'll get a little bit of this. And just start feathering in a little bit of that mid-tone, just to give us another colour to work with. There we go. You can see how I'm sort of feathering those lines towards the edge there to sort of create a kind of hatchwork sort of thing. You see that? Okay, and that's just help blending it in. So we've got a little mid-tone in there. And then we come back with our straight again, corpse pale. And just keep building that up. So you're trying to create a little bit of a light. It's a little bit too thick there. So we'll adjust, get your point back. We're just creating little points of interest. Okay. Re-establishing that line there. And then on the edge there. And you know, just build it up. And so now we just want to do that little bit of highlight on the edge, and you're just hitting those edges again, the very I guess the line edge highlight kind of process. So just this little edge here and on the side of your brush, just to build that up a little bit. Just like that, just to give it a bit more bright, and possibly down the this part here. There we go. It's looking good, and we're all good. All right, I'll come back and finish off the other side, and then we'll do the top. All right, and I'll bring you back in. So we're going to be doing this shoulder now. So again, similar to how I've done the leg here, we're going to have the shadow up in this crease here, and then the light on the edge. So we just bring it straight across and in there like that, straight down. Okay, get your corpse pale ready, run it along. Okay, and then always be wiping your brush, and then we just gently fade this in to add a little bit of that lighter tone. That just sets us up, just starting off. And then we can come back in like we've done before and slowly add more colors, more lights over that, and generate some midtones as well. There we go. And we're just trying to get that little tiny bits of dotting and lines to create interesting shapes across that surface. Keep working with it until we see something interesting. You know, leave it alone. Go again. Pretty much just using the very edge of our brush. Okay, and we keep building it up. So I'm going to go away and finish this off, and then we'll take one final look at it. Alright, I'll see you soon. And there we have it. One finished set of pale armor. Pretty cool. So yeah, I think doing this extra step, this extra video, sorry, for this is probably worth it. Just so you can see a bit more how to do this. Now obviously this technique isn't something you're going to do on every single model, but for your character or something like that, or you know, a particular model that you really love, this is pretty fun to do. I've definitely enjoyed doing it. It's yeah, it's a whole different kind of way of approaching something that you'd normally paint in a different way, you know, and yeah, it comes out pretty cool. So it's not finished yet, obviously. We're going to come back in and do glazing. So next week's video will be glazing into this armor and adding some variation of colors. At the moment it's just sort of one set of colors all the way up, and we want to add in some variety and some interest into those shadows and some of the highlights and all those little pockmark holes, to help boost it and make it way more interesting, and that'll tie it in more with the flesh. As you can see, now that we've done the armor's popping quite bright. That skin tone is actually quite dark now, so that gives us a good cue to then come back in with some lighter tones when we go to do the flesh for the final pass. We'll definitely be lifting that a little bit in certain areas just to help keep it in sympathy with the armor. But that depends on how the glazing goes and what the finished product looks like. But yeah, it's coming along really nice. So next week we'll be doing glazing, and then the week after that we'll get straight into doing all the secondary details to finish it off. So yeah, hope you've enjoyed this. Please hit the subscribe, notify button, all that kind of stuff. It really helps me out. I'll leave you with an overview at the end and a close-up shot of this and the recipe as per normal. But otherwise, have a great day, and I'll catch you on the next one.